Proceedings of the Sisyphian Society for the Systematic Study of Useful Knowledge, Volume 1, Number 3, of the meeting having been convened the 30th of June, 2020. The topics having been talk radio and podcasts.
Hello, Kyle.
Hello.
How are you?
Nothing to excess. I'm all right. How are you?
Pretty good.
Well, Matt, I've realized that we really should say something fun or gripping in the first few seconds of every issue.
Of course.
I realize that I really want to be able to recommend an issue for people to start with, to start listening to.
Is that this one?
And the first two issues are pretty impenetrable.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking in this pre-meeting banter, we really need to say something hilarious.
Right.
Or something emotionally charged.
Right.
Or something that gets people invested. So if you could go ahead and just say something laugh out loud hilarious.
Oh, I don't think that's actually how this works. We might have to dedicate an entire episode to figuring out how to do humor on command.
Well, that's okay, Matt, because I this time have two things to keep people listening.
Great.
Which I'm mentioning now in the first few seconds.
Just on point.
I am going to get emotionally charged in this meeting.
Whoa.
In fact, I'm going to go on my first official rant. I am going to call out some very large American technology companies.
Watch out.
I am going to talk about how they've wasted days of my life and how they may be destroying the podcasting landscape as we know it.
Wow.
I'm going to call for boycotts, and boy, am I going to get angry.
I'm excited for this now.
Oh, good. It worked on Matt.
Great. That's the first rung.
Here's the other thing to keep people listening and grab their attention right up front. Matt, we have a guest this time.
Oh my gosh.
And he or she...
keeping that ambiguity there.
...is going to be hilarious.
Good.
He or she is going to be insightful. I'm sure this guest is just going to bring the house down. But now we don't know exactly when this guest is going to show up.
Yeah, she might, or he, might happen at any moment in this podcast, like right now.
Or not. So our listeners are just going to have to keep listening. They'll never know.
As listeners ought.
Okay, well, the meeting will come to order. As we said in the first issue, we're going to try and alternate between boring and quote-unquote fun topics. Now, the first issue was an introduction, which we considered pretty darn boring. And last issue, I don't know, what should we call that, Matt?
That's a great question.
I think
it was boring.
Okay. Well, that's
Wait, what did you say? Did you say fun?
I was going to say half fun.
Oh, yeah, no, it was half fun. Because it involved the listeners. And they always love that. They're narcissists in that sense.
And there were media clips.
That's true. There were media clips.
So this issue, I think, will also be half fun. So combined.
Wait, we're not just saying quote unquote fun?
It will be half quote unquote fun.
And what's the other half? Boring?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or impassioned.
Right.
I guess we'll see.
That's the part that isn't fun, though. The impassioned part.
And then we will get to a real boring.
Wow.
And really boring one.
Finally, the purpose of the...
Yes.
The society.
Right. So the topic this time, the main topic, is going to be talk radio and podcasts. What a great thing to talk about at the beginning of a podcast. So if you would just want to skip right to that meat, right to that content, you can check the timestamp in the minutes, and you can skip right to that. I should also say this to Matt at the top. Not only are we experimenting with having a guest on this week, but we're also experimenting with increasing the length of these meetings. And we want to address this up front because I'm guessing some people, when they see that a podcast episode is long and they get like disappointed about that, or I sometimes see complaints like in iTunes reviews about like these episodes are too long. I really personally
we're really striving to hit that demographic to make sure that we get those kinds of reviews.
I personally, except that I personally don't understand that at all. I am overjoyed when I see a podcast that I listen to had an episode that was long because I'm subscribed to that podcast and I enjoy listening to it. I don't really get why people are like, oh no, this thing I hate and it's a long one. I'm sorry, I messed that up. Let me try that again.
Wow, that would be surprising, I guess.
I don't really get why people say, oh man, a thing I love but it's a long one.
Yeah. Maybe they just don't love it that much. Maybe they just love it like, a little bit at a time.
I guess. One of the podcasts I'm subscribed to just released an episode that's over 3 hours long.
Oh my gosh, that sounds horrible.
See, you're one of these irrational people, Matt. I love this podcast, so why would I not want to listen for longer?
It's like candy. You can only have so much before you feel sick.
Well, so thank you for mentioning that, because the next thing I was going to say is I hope people realize it's not like you have to, especially if you're new to podcasts, it's not like you have to sit and listen to this entire thing in one sitting. Especially if you're using a podcasting app, which we're going to talk about in a minute. You can pause and go do something else and come back to it later. In fact, you can even
Is that allowed?
You can even go listen to some other podcast if you want.
Oh, I don't know if that even makes sense.
Yeah.
How are you going to keep track of the flow of the argument or the discussion?
Well, that's true. This is pretty airtight.
You're right. I guess when the podcast is going on for 3 hours, you can assume that there's a sufficient amount of rambling that's happening.
Well, or you could just check the minutes and catch up to speed on, oh, that's right, that's what they were just talking about.
Right.
Man, aren't what we call them minutes, the show notes, aren't the show notes so useful? Aren't they such a critical element of podcasts that you're just so glad exist? Now, also on that rambling point, I think that is why some people complain. They go, oh, they were just rambling on and on. But Matt and I will not ramble. We have top tier content to get through. The problem is we just have too much to talk about.
That is always the problem.
And, Matt, this really harkens to the phone calls that you and I have had for years. We should probably talk about that at some point. But you know what? For the sake of the listener, I'm going to skip that fun, interesting, insightful, personally engaging anecdote for the sake of time, because people just hate long things. So we'll have to save that for later.
That amazing compassion on display.
We've also been sort of joking about guilting friends and family members into listening. But if that's actually why you're listening, and that's why you're like, oh man, I have to listen to this because, Matt's on it and Matt is my son, but it's 3 hours long. I think we should probably offer those people an indulgence and say, you're not a bad friend or family member if you refuse to listen to this podcast. You're a bad human being probably, but you're not necessarily a bad friend or family member.
Right. It has nothing to do with the podcast.
Right.
I think we should also point out, and perhaps we're going to get to this later, but you can play podcasts at 2 times speed, especially if what you're listening to is devoid of real content or, intellectual stimulation. You can just press that time speed button.
It's true. You're kind of the master of that, really. I think you're one of the people who got me hooked on that, especially with YouTube. So we should talk about that. I do have that coming up in the notes later.
Okay, fair enough.
I would also just say this. Think of it as like a dining room conversation. Imagine if you had Matt and myself over to your house accidentally, and we were just eating a meal, for example. How long could we sit and talk around the table?
I'll tell you this.
More than 1 hour, I bet.
It would not be 1 hour.
So this is just like that. It could go on forever. The only difference being you don't really get to talk, listeners.
Well.
Or do you?
That's the question.
The number is 1-805-538-2382. That's how you chime in at this pleasant dining room conversation. I would also say you could compare this to reality TV. Think about how long people will sit and watch a reality TV show that's essentially just people sitting around talking.
Yeah, but they do pull each other's hair at certain points, right?
Well, so I invite our listeners to occasionally pull their own hair.
There you go, and you can simulate the experience.
Right. I mean, the other difference, obviously, is we don't have moving pictures, but I would just tell a listener, you can go ahead and move your head while you're listening.
There you go. Now the whole world is moving.
You can even look at the things we're talking about. So, let's test this for a second. Hey, Matt, I have a hand. Okay, now listeners, look at your hand, and it will be like, oh, I see what he's talking about.
I see mine. I know it's analogous to Kyle's, because that's what it means for it to share the same label.
Let's see. I already talked about how you don't have to listen to the whole thing in one sitting. Especially because we're trying to figure out how frequently we're going to come out with these, and it depends in part on how long it takes to edit. And if this one takes me as long to edit as the previous ones did, we might have to switch to a less frequent publication schedule. Let's say we only came out with these every other week, and let's say they were 2 hours. Then you could just, if you wanted to, just listen to 1 hour per week. I would also just quote actually, this is one of these quotes that's attributed to like 1 million people. But the quote, "If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter."
Is that Pascal?
Well, he is one of them, yeah. Lincoln is also said to have, I mean, maybe it's an idea.
That's much later.
So anyway, it's actually harder to make these shorter. So if you think, oh, well, this will save Matt and Kyle time, it's like, no, actually, it's easier to go on with the whole thing than to go back and cut things out and try and make it shorter. Now that I said all those things about it being long and thereby making it longer, let's get to the really important stuff, Matt, which is let's quickly get through refreshments. Are you enjoying some refreshments for this meeting?
I just ran out of my refreshment, actually.
Wow. So Matt's going to become parched.
So yeah, I'm totally parched.
You're going to need something to drink when you hear my fiery rant.
I figure as much.
I am enjoying some, sorry, I got distracted here by my refreshments. I'm enjoying some fresh Provisions State tap water. I also this time have some Diet Coke because, again, this is going to get fiery and heated up.
Whoa.
And I also, Matt, I haven't gotten my oil changed yet.
So now you're eating your car?
So I've been living off exclusively Dunkin' Donuts for the last week.
Oh, no.
Our listeners to the last issue will recall why. But the good news is I haven't noticed any negative side effects yet. And also, I've been living off exclusively Dunkin' Donuts for the last week, and I haven't noticed any negative side effects yet.
We're going to have to talk after the podcast.
Also, I would just like to say Dunkin' Donuts is welcome to be a sponsor of this program.
Now, that's not a bad point. Actually, never mind. Yeah, you just go ahead and eat your donuts, Kyle. Dunkin' Donuts, we're here for you to, have your advertising real estate.
Let's quickly address the elephant in the room, which is that
the first of this episode.
Matt still doesn't have a nice microphone, as you can hear.
It's true.
So I'm about to contact his brother to steal your credit card number, and I'll just buy it for you. Also, just with regard to the last issue, if people noticed, Matt was sitting in a very squeaky, creaky chair. So you probably heard some of that. And you might have, as a listener, thought, well, at least it only squeaked when Matt was speaking. That's pretty helpful, huh?
Nice.
No, it definitely didn't. The whole time. When I'm speaking, I could just mute Matt's audio so you didn't hear the terrible chair. But when Matt was speaking, the chair noise had to be there. I couldn't get rid of it. Matt, it also sounded like you were playing marbles or something on the top of your desk.
I was definitely not playing marbles.
I don't know. It sounded a lot like that. I edited out a lot of marble sounding things. Matt, I could hear a lot of mouse clicks on your side. Now, this is odd because it would suggest that you're surfing the web or something while I'm talking. So I did actually leave a few of those clicks in. And from here on out, I just want to let you know, I'm not going to edit out the mouse clicks. And I'm just going to ask the audience to help publicly shame Matt if they hear clicking. It means that he is not paying attention and he's just on Twitter.
Well, fair enough. I'll have to become more creative in my surfing ways.
Okay, now, everyone's favorite segment, Errata. All the problems. We're going to do these quickly. Actually, we have to start by going back to the first issue because I found another error there. I said if anyone is still listening at some point in that first issue, I'll eat my own hat. Well, the correct saying is just I'll eat my hat. It shouldn't have had the own in there. Now, that's sort of a complex thing that I started to look into, where the origins of that saying and what it really should be. So I might have to report back on that more in the future.
It's amazing how this podcast really is a window into our lives.
It is. I was reminded of this because a former 5th and 6th grade teacher of mine, Mr. A, sent me a text out of nowhere that just said, "Eat your hat." So it meant he had listened.
Whoa. Also,
in the first issue, I referred to this program as a show. Well, we don't have episodes, Matt, and we're also not a show.
Right.
Okay, we're not just like monkeys performing for you here.
Not at all.
It's condescending enough that we call it a podcast.
That was legally required.
We can move on now to the second issue. The first bit of correspondence I wanted to share, this is correspondence related to an error, was a personal message sent to me from Tyler. You might remember Tyler from the previous issue.
Yes.
He sent a message when the second issue first came out that said, "Perfect for my drive today."
But was it?
Then he came back and edited that comment later after listening. And he
was it perfect for his drive that day?
He said, "Edit. Listened to the podcast. It was pretty good and entertaining. I'd say cut out a decent amount of the beginning part, as we don't really care what errors were in the last podcast.
Oh, he does not yet understand the true purpose of the podcast.
He says, and get to the more in-depth topics, like how you covered Scooby-Doo. He ends with, Kyle's mic was really good.
Wow. Subtle, Tyler.
First of all, is it my mic? Or is it the sweet, smooth sounds of my voice that you love, Tyler?
I think we all know.
Matt, don't you want to get that kind of compliment?
Of course.
Here's the problem. The only way to address this error that Tyler's bringing up regarding our last issue is to address the errors in our previous issues.
Yeah.
But if we do that, then we're doing what Tyler's asked us not to do.
It's really just a total contradictory and paradoxical mess.
Right, an infinite feedback loop problem here.
Right, a ridiculous Russian doll situation.
Now, at the time that he made that comment, Tyler represented approximately 1/77th of our audience.
Wow.
So we had to take him seriously back then. But we're growing, baby.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty soon we won't have to take any single person's input seriously. No, but actually someone else texted me to register the same complaint. So now we're up to 2/77ths of our listeners.
Oh, no.
So I was thinking, actually, it might help to make Tyler into sort of a token character for us to keep in mind.
Right.
As like the average listener.
Oh, I thought you were going to say as sort of like a setup enemy that we could pillory.
Oh, no, that's William.
Oh, well, right. I guess we already have William.
Right. I think Tyler's more of the average guy. I'm imagining Tyler's, the character of Tyler in my head is like, hey, you guys, I'm Tyler. I'm just an average cool guy.
Right. With his hands going.
How did you know?
Just an average cool guy.
See? It's like TV. You can
yeah. No, I see it. I see
words. I'm painting pictures with my words.
You're painting words with your pictures.
He says, now, guys like me, we don't need to hear about all them errors and corrections.
Yeah, he says them instead of those.
He says, you guys should just get to the main stuff. The in-depth, hard-hitting stuff.
I don't even know what voice this is. There's like 12 different accents.
It's my attempt to do a normal person, which in my mind is a Brooklyn dock worker from the 1940s.
Good.
So, get to the Scooby-Doo. Know what I mean? Yeah, I'm walking here.
Right.
So I think it'll be useful to keep just sort of Tyler in the back of our minds.
Okay.
I would also say this is a helpful reminder that average people probably shouldn't be listening to this.
Right.
Because especially after this issue, it's about to get really boring and technical and cryptic. So That's just a warning. And also, I hope this doesn't come across as mean or dismissive in any way, because it's not meant to be.
That's one of the principles, actually.
Right. Don't be mean.
Don't be mean.
But I would remind Tyler or any other listeners who don't enjoy this or any other segments of our program that you can actually skip ahead using the very handy timestamps in the minutes.
Boom.
Okay. So, Tyler, if you want to, you can go ahead and just skip that. You'll just find it in the minutes and you can just skip ahead to main discussion. So if you want to do that, that's fine. We forgive you. Do you think he's gone?
I think so.
Here's what I think we should do. I think we should do that. Remember the avocado diet thing where we propose that people eat nothing but avocados and then it turns out to be deadly?
Oh.
We could say that in the main segment. Like, hey guys, just eat avocados.
Right. But everyone else would know that you really shouldn't eat avocados because we do need to keep the people who, aren't Tyler.
Right. So in the errata for the next one, we would say, by the way, guys, or we could do it the same one. We're going to say to eat avocados, but don't actually do that. We'll come up with something.
Okay.
The problem is, of course, Matt, you and I really care about what errors were in the last issue. We have academic and journalistic standards to uphold.
We have standards.
But Matt, sometimes hoi polloi do have a point. Bread and circuses, Matt. So I propose what I would like to call the Tyler compromise, which is do the errata, but do them as quickly as possible.
Very well. Go for it.
The grammar ones, I realize, are probably the most unbearable ones. But really, we're doing
perhaps the most important.
Well, yeah, I would say we're doing a public service when we bring those up. We're teaching everyone better.
Right.
Better
this podcast is very pedagogical.
So, quickly. Last time, Matt, we forgot to call the meeting to order.
Oh, no.
So, it just, in the minutes, I noted that it naturally came to order. I think this is probably because we don't have gavels. So if a listener would be willing to send in gavels, if there are any gavel manufacturers listening, we will use those, and you can sponsor on here for free.
I need to get my gavel from home.
I said in the last meeting that I didn't want to have errors on top of errors because it would lead to confusing minutes. Well, unfortunately, we have some errors on top of errors, things that we said incorrectly in the errata of the last issue. I think I said I edit it way too much when I should have said I edited it way too much.
Right. You needed it in the past tense.
Edited it is hard to say.
Right. And it could have led to further errata if you had mispronounced it.
Edited it, did. I also mentioned that there's lip smacking getting picked up by the microphone. I should have actually said tongue clicking, because what it is me doing this as though I'm about to scold the listener, clicking my tongue. Also, I noticed there's a whole lot of throat clearing going on like that. But I think that's sort of symbolic for what this podcast is all about.
Because that's pretty much what the theme of the whole podcast is.
So I'm going to continue doing that on purpose. Also, donuts are clogging my windpipe.
Right.
I realize also I'm saying now a lot. Like I go, now. But
which is also an academic convention, I think.
It is. So we'll continue that. I said at one point, I don't know if this is funny just because I have such low stakes for myself. I don't think I meant low stakes. I meant low expectations.
Right.
Matt, you called it an episode. Shame.
Oh, wow. I have been shamed.
An obvious error in the last one was that, and this was corrected in the proceedings itself, was our hysterical laughter. So,
yes.
But really, it was kind of fitting for an issue that's about humor.
Are we retrospectively making that one the humor episode?
Wow. Listeners can tell Matt doesn't listen to the podcast because, yes, humor is in the title of that one.
Oh, really?
What listeners don't know, because we had the outtake bleeps that cut out most of it, is that hysterical laughter went on for 3.5 minutes.
Which sounds like it's not very long, but was in fact a very long time.
And if we ever actually get a patronage system set up, I'm thinking maybe that should be one of the rewards.
Do you get to listen to the full laugh track?
3.5 minutes of hysteria.
Good.
This next correction came to us by text message from, again, my friend David. You might remember he's the one who texted to correct my mistake of saying I was a group of, it was like 2 or 3 people. Well, unfortunately, there was an error in our correction of that error. So David sent me a text that said,
I'm deeply grateful for the public credit you gave me for catching your error.
Oh my goodness, who's saying this?
Is that David?
Oh my, what? Can you hear
David?
me?
Is this loyal fan David?
Oh my gosh.
My loyalty is paid off in massive and unexpected joyous dividends, allowing me to join you in the world of not podcasting.
Holy cow.
Wasn't that fun and exciting when he just showed up?
That was so spontaneous and unplanned.
I hope everyone was sitting down for fear that they would have passed out due to the shock of my arrival.
You really had to be listening to every moment of this and not skipping around to catch that.
Wow, what a treat for faithful listeners.
What a treat.
But so before we continue with that correction, maybe we should just say, David, that you and I know each other from going to undergrad together.
Yes.
And I would just want to say, I think this is maybe the fastest anyone has ever gone from being a fan to being on the thing itself.
Oh, yeah. It's incredible. I've waited for years.
Are you saying in general, or are you saying for this podcast?
Well, clearly for this podcast, but I think ever. I mean, when has someone been the first fan of a thing, and then a week later they're on the thing?
That's just the kind of exemplary service that you get here.
It makes me feel kind of like we're the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
That's kind of overstating.
We're basically the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
Slight exaggeration.
Speaking of which, David, I'm afraid we also have some terrible news.
Oh boy, that's taking a dark turn.
It's been nice, David.
It was about 2 minutes ago.
Tyler's going to be very confused when he's listening later and there's a third person on here.
Oh boy. So
that's very true. Poor Tyler. That's what you get when you skip ahead.
Yeah. Poor Tyler.
I should also mention, in case listeners are like, wait a minute, wasn't George the first person? Even if George didn't say he's a loyal fan, he did say he was willing to be a guest. And I will say this, I'm trying to find a spot for George. I thought George could be our guest on our issue on Reddit, because I thought he might be a Redditor.
Yeah, that would fit the profile.
Well, you'd think, but he replied back with some snarky thing about how Reddit is for plebes. And then I remembered, oh, that's right, George is more of a 4chan troll. So I don't think we want to do an issue on 4chan probably, but
not at all.
I was thinking we could have an issue on Japanese culture that Matt and George could nerd out about.
That would be perfect.
David, where are you joining us from?
My table and a chair in an apartment in a state known as Nebraska.
The Cornhusker State.
You know, it is known as that. It's also known as the place where you the statement or the saying for the state is the good life, or it used to be. I think it's changed recently.
That's too bad if that changes.
Yeah, actually, I think it changed.
They had to remove that.
It changed to Nebraska. Honestly, it's not for everyone, and I think that's actually true. So,
well, at least that's more truthful.
I guess so. I like it.
See, I have all this top tier content, but I'm watching the clock and I'm like, I might have to skip this great bit because we're going to run so long. But David, I wanted to say when I was trying to dig up some dirt on you before you'd be on here, I was thinking about your location, and I was thinking, I hope you don't mind me revealing these intimate details.
I guess it's going to happen, so go for it.
That you spent a lot of your growing up near Dallas, Texas.
Yes.
Then you moved to Minneapolis, St. Paul area.
Correct.
Where I met you.
Yes.
Then you moved to Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, where you are in Nebraska, I realized your latitude has changed pretty drastically.
Well, I was in Florida for a year as well.
Oh, well, forget about that for a second. You've gone from almost as far north as you can go in the U.S. to almost as far south as you can go to almost as far middle as you can go. But it's all been within a relatively small longitudinal window. It's like you can't move east or west.
Except for to Florida, which we're disregarding.
Yes, that's terrible.
We can edit that out.
Good. Then I asked where you grew up because I remembered that you grew up in Canada.
Oh my gosh.
And I was really hoping that you had grown up in eastern Manitoba or western Ontario because that would be within the David window. But unfortunately, no, you had to wreck that part too and say that you're from Alberta.
Now it's been twice wrecked by Florida, which we'll edit out, and Alberta.
So I would just consider rewriting your personal history to make it more interesting.
Right. When we said we were going to edit it out, we meant out of your history.
Oh, perfect.
I would also just like to note, remember when Matt mocked me in the last issue about us having international guests?
I don't.
Yeah. Wow. Little did he know.
Well, who's laughing now?
I've been had.
The Great White North, the Canadians.
Well, and on the Canadian topic,
oh boy,
did you know, this is something I learned about Ottawa recently, that Ottawa had to come up with a new slogan, presumably before it was, "It's Ottawa." But they came up with a new slogan that wanted to stress that it was both beautiful and really into high technology. So they went with technically beautiful. Which is pretty dumb because they could have easily gone with beautifully technical.
Yeah. Technically beautiful sounds like a backhanded comment. Well, I mean, they're technically beautiful, but...
Right. And I guess that's sort of Canadian. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, David.
Or we're known for being very friendly, which is, not a bad thing, and clean. And that's about it. Well, that's not true, but those are the two things that come to my mind.
But not backhanded compliments. That's not really part of the stereotype.
Not a Canadian thing.
Well, enough idle chit chat. David, we're on time here, guys.
Yeah, let's get cracking. We got places to be.
David, you should I think finish reading your correction text.
Oh, I want nothing more than to press my code to open my phone and then 1 second.
Wow, this is increasing the length of this podcast dramatically.
All right, here we go. Right from the top. And now, I'm deeply grateful for the public credit you gave me for catching your error. While I sat beaming with prideful joy and laughing with my podcasting pals, I was struck by another error. I said, casual schizophrenia, when what I actually said was causal schizophrenia, which of course doesn't actually exist. I assume you made the error in a good-natured attempt to put the best construction on what seemed like an obvious error on my part. Unfortunately, what you actually did was deprive the world of a potentially brilliant discovery in the world of psychology.
Brilliant.
So I hope you can sleep at night, Kyle, knowing what you've done. And now the world knows.
Well, David, I hate to bring this up, but I believe you just made an error in reading
Oh,
your
no.
correction of the error that was made on our correction of an error.
I was hoping you weren't going to notice that
Because what I said, you said, was causal schizophrenia, when what your text actually said was casual schizophrenia.
Oh, no. That's what I meant. Oh, man.
But see, what I said just seems like it makes more sense. So it's also what your brain naturally did.
Wow. See, this is where goodwill just goes awry.
Great.
See, Tyler's missing all this golden content.
Man,
Poor
I was
Tyler.
so joyful. Wow.
David also follows it up with a text that says, by the way, you guys are putting out good stuff.
Well,
So
yeah.
wanted to make sure that get read.
Yeah, probably should.
Now, he also sent a text that said, wow, your first loyal fan, which led me to believe that David was texting live as he was listening.
I did do
And I
that.
thought, that's pretty bold, because what if a few moments after that we said something terrible about him?
For a
Right.
brief moment, I was filled with elation and joy, and I wanted to share that.
And it was all snuffed out.
Now it was,
Sad.
because I made my own error twice. Or something
Oh,
like that.
man. You'll never live it down.
I had replied to David and I said, great. I'm foreseeing this podcast just becoming one massive discussion of errors upon errors. David said not to worry about including it. I said, no, we have to maintain our journalistic standards, David.
Oh, yeah.
At which point, I don't know if you would like to read this or if I should read this next laudatory one, David.
I'll say it. Your integrity is admirable. Make sure you include that, ellipsis, so that the world knows the quality of the character of the podcast host. Sorry. Also, I'm sure Matt's quality of character is admirable as well.
Wow.
Also, I would be thrilled to be a guest. I can talk about anything, ellipsis, at length.
At length.
Perfect.
David, while you're here, I also wanted to correct not quite an error, but more a ethical misstep.
Oh boy. On my part?
In the last issue, when Matt said, do I know David? And I said, oh, I think you do know him. And my first thing was, he's a bearded gentleman.
Wow.
And I just didn't want to imply that that was your defining character trait.
Yeah, there's a lot more to me than my beard, Kyle. Though, having said that, my beard is incredible and often admired by many.
Right. I get that.
Yeah, as Matt also being a bearded fellow.
So anyway, I apologize. I should have said something like, yes, you might remember. He's that delightfully kind, intelligent young man, strapping.
Full face beard.
Yeah, that could be like fourth or something.
Yeah.
Also, I have been growing out terrible quarantine facial hair.
Yes.
Good,
I'm thinking
good.
maybe we should have David back for an issue on the best facial hair maintenance.
Oh,
That's a
man.
great idea.
I'd be thrilled.
Okay, now, David, if you could not talk again until we get to the main discussion. No, I'm just kidding. But do remember the Tyler Compromise. We're going really quickly through these errata.
Do it. Yeah, we're going real fast.
So, Matt, sometimes I sound like I'm not always listening to you. I realize this listening back to them. The thing is, I have a long outline of things that I've prepared that I'm trying to get through. So my mind is already reading ahead to the next thing. And so sometimes when you say a thing, I don't completely register what it is that you said. So, like, for example, this week I have a 28-page outline to get through.
Jeez.
So I for one thing, I missed some jokes. And while I'm editing, I hear those jokes and it's like a fun little surprise. But also sometimes it makes it seem like I'm being dismissive of what you say. Like when you asked about why Velma is considered a lesbian, I responded and I just said something like, yeah, I don't know. I didn't go down that particular rabbit hole. It's as though I were saying, why are you talking, Matt? Why are you interrupting my podcast?
I noticed that.
Or similarly, when you mentioned that someone should donate to us the Cambridge Grammar of the English language.
Yes.
Which is something I am immensely interested in and didn't know existed even. And I looked
Really?
it up afterwards and I'm like, wow, I did not know about this massive project. This is right up my alley.
It really
But
is.
instead at the time, you said it and there was a pause and then I went, sounds good to me. So anyway, I just want to apologize that it seems like I'm not always listening to you guys. Hello?
What?
At least there is one upside, which is that my not always listening helps us go quickly.
There we go.
Also, if Matt's just surfing Twitter the whole time, I feel a little less bad about it. Another error on top of an error. When I said national code in the telephone number, I meant country calling code or country dial-in code, that first number. It's not called the national code. Now, the problem is I probably won't say it's just so we don't have to correct this every single time. I probably will omit that first digit quite a bit of the time because I'm afraid of confusing our U.S. listeners.
Right.
Because in America, we're trained to forget about the rest of the world and all other countries. And
True.
so, for example, on our phone numbers, we don't put that first number. And I'm afraid if I say it, people will go like, why is this phone number 11 digits long? Okay, I'm going quickly here. I also said, Matt, that we should make a couple quick announcements in the last one, but then we only made one announcement.
Oh, no. I thought you were going to say we made 3 announcements, which is technically not a couple.
Now, I don't know if that's actually an error because I just said we should make a couple quick announcements.
Well, there you go. Then we're in the clear.
I called it a show. Again, we're not monkeys.
Shameful.
I had mentioned that Nathan was a musician. And then the very next comment was my friend Chris. And I realized I also should have said, oh, Chris is also a musician. So what we should probably do is have all of our friends who are musicians, they can just record their parts individually.
Perfect.
Of redoing our theme song and then send it to us and we'll put it all together. And David, do you still play drums?
I do. You know, I thought about myself as well as being ignored as a musician, but now that you've brought it up to the public knowledge,
now watch David be the only one who submits his and our theme song is just drumming.
Wow, I'm not sure that
awesome.
would really fit with the ethos of the society. But, you know,
very loud and aggressive,
try.
Maybe tribal.
Now, this one isn't so much of an error as a clarification. The Scooby-Doo fandom wiki does have a name. Would you like to guess what its name is?
No.
I see Matt's not listening. It's called Scoobypedia.
Ugh.
So I can tell that neither of you read the minutes from last time because that was listed in the minutes.
Well, who knew that this would turn into a quiz show?
When I made my editorial interjection, I said, I'm, quote, going to interject quick. I meant quickly. And this is the most embarrassing one so far. And it's like a factual error.
Oh, good.
I said multiple times that Looney Tunes had won Emmys.
You did.
I meant Academy Awards, aka Oscars.
Wow, very shameful.
The Emmys are for television, and the whole point, part of the point I was making is that these weren't just TV shows; they were in movie theaters. So it's to my great shame that I said Emmys twice. I said I was adding puppetry to my quote-unquote fun list of topics. I should have said I was adding it to my list of quote-unquote fun topics. The list itself isn't quote-unquote fun. The topics are quote-unquote fun. Okay, now actually, this is the most embarrassing one, maybe. I said when we talked about how humor is probably immoral, and Matt, I'm kind of surprised you didn't call me out on this. I said, quote, and this is pretty much agreed upon in all the early Western tradition. Pretty much everyone thought, yeah, laughter is pretty immoral. It's really focusing on the wrong things. We should be focused with the serious business of life and so on.
Oh, I thought we were just being sarcastic.
Wow, we were not being sarcastic.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Now, to be fair, I did add the qualifier pretty much the whole early Western tradition. But it's really hard to say that much of anything is agreed upon by all of the early Western tradition. So, of course, I should have just said, the good and correct parts of the tradition.
Right, which is what anyone ever means by the tradition.
This seems pretty bold.
There have always been hedonists and libertines.
Great.
An anonymous listener texted me to correct me because I said at one point, that'll learn them. And the listener said I should have said, that'll teach them.
Oh, but shouldn't you have actually said, that'll learn them, durnum?
Well, I don't think we should start counting intentional errors as errors, or else this is going to get even more ridiculous than it already is. Also, I wanted to ask David, isn't that'll learn them proper grammar in the South?
Yes.
Thank you. But probably our biggest error, and this is the last one, thank goodness, and it's really more of a procedural error, is that we talked about Scooby-Doo for like 25 minutes. So I think, and that was because George left a voicemail message. So I think, right, Matt, for the future, when someone asks a question that's unrelated to things that we're talking about, we should probably either say, great question, we'll add it to our list and get to it in a future issue, or just give it a really quick answer like you properly did. So really, this was just my mistake. Okay, well, we maybe failed the Tyler compromise that time, but, we had a guest, so that's the excuse.
Yeah, I accept responsibility.
Yeah, we'll blame David for this one. We're really sorry, Tyler.
Are there any... Well, he's not listening yet. Maybe he's listening right now because he wants to hear whether the minutes get approved.
It depends on where you put the minute notes.
Are there any corrections to the minutes from last time? Since now we know you both read them carefully. Okay, there being no corrections to the minutes stand approved. Now for a quick segment. Tyler should be interested in this. I think everyone should be, called Updates. I would call it a follow-up, but I think that's trademark John Siracusa. So this is not errors. This is just updates. When I said I couldn't think of the name of the AE ligature, that ligature, don't worry, there's only a couple of these. That ligature is often called AE. The traditional name for it is ash. I'm skipping some of these. Oh, I wanted to check to see if Scoobypedia got updated, because do you remember I called on our listeners to update that so that I wouldn't have to? And this was like the first test of our crowdsourcing.
Right.
And as I check right now, it has not been updated.
Come on, fans.
If we can't do that, this project might not work. Also, I wanted to add this update. There is one more Scooby-Doo-related thing I can endorse that I found. I'm not going to play the clip now because it'll take too long. Then we'll have to comment on it, and that'll take even longer. So the link for that clip will just be in the minutes. Man, aren't minutes so incredibly useful and valuable and indispensable? And aren't we glad that we have them and they work in all the good podcasting apps? Okay,
Great.
The other thing I was going to do for an update is, are we still invisible to Google? Are we still blocked? But maybe if one of you wants to check that, I don't want to waste time.
Fair enough. I'll check it.
Now, this section everyone wants to hear, announcements.
Yeah.
We are now on Apple Podcasts.
Woo!
All right.
That means it's easier to subscribe to us. Many other apps use the Apple Podcast directory besides just the Apple Podcast app. Here's the other even cooler announcement. We got our first Apple Podcasts review.
What did it say?
All right.
First of all, reviews are out of 5 stars. This person gave us a 5-star review.
Wow. That's great.
David, was this you?
No.
And it says, so it's from a user named ninjavideo.
Oh, you know what? That might have been me. It was not. Go ahead.
And the comment, the review says, first. Do people still comment first on YouTube videos anymore? Maybe that shows my age. Regardless,
are we sure this isn't your mom?
I'm sure. But thanks for calling my mom old. Regardless, I'd like to claim my spot in history as the first reviewer of your podcast on the Apple Podcasts app. I'm looking forward to the multitude of topics you may be covering in the future. Honestly, some of the boring topics sounded more fun than the fun ones. I must align pretty well to the demographic of listeners you were aiming for. P.S.
What, did you put this? Oh, go ahead.
P.S. I'm not Kyle's grandma.
See, that's what made me think it was your mother.
No, she wouldn't know how to do that. And also, she doesn't have Apple Podcasts.
She isn't a ninja video connoisseur.
Right. My thought was, do you guys remember Ask a Ninja?
Yes, of course I do.
No.
I love that. I am ninja, he is ninja. That one?
Right.
Wow.
So thanks for listening, Ask a Ninja.
Yeah, we have, in the absence of evidence, we must assume it was the Ask a Ninja guy.
So I have added now to the support page of our website, Sisyphiansociety.org. Now a thing I have added there is go leave us a review on Apple Podcasts.
Nice.
Because Apple Podcast directory is the most influential one. And if things get good reviews on there, Apple bumps them up and starts recommending them to other people.
Now,
so it's not just for our vanity. Like, it actually increases how many listeners we'll get.
Which in turn is for our vanity.
Well,
but I think there's another question here, which is, Kyle, why are you calling it Apple Podcasts instead of iTunes?
Well, I'm afraid that's a boring answer, which is just that Apple has rebranded it.
Well, I thought it was going to be a rant.
I really thought that was going to trigger a rant too, but I don't have the notes that Kyle has, so I never know what's happening.
Okay, the rant is coming very quickly. I'm skipping some more of this great content that I prepared.
I can report that we are, in fact, on Google on the 3rd page.
Wow.
So you spelled it the way we spell it?
Yep.
And it didn't redirect you to EAN?
Well, it tried to, but it didn't immediately, which is a good sign.
So once we get Google to stop correcting our name, then our next mission is to get up, to number 1 in the results, or at least the first page. Okay, I'm skipping all this brilliant stuff I had prepared, down to Tyler also asks, do you plan on being available on Google Podcasts? Well, this next announcement, we are now. We're also on Google Podcasts.
Congrats, Tyler.
We are also on Spotify now.
Wow.
And I am working on getting us into some more directories, but those are the biggest ones, I believe. So we're at least in those for now. The next thing is I thought we could report on the stats again in case people are interested to know. And I know Matt does want to hear these.
Oh, yeah.
So our first issue is now up to 92 downloads.
Holy cow.
Almost, I thought we were going to break 100 before. And that means, Matt, that it's definitely gone beyond just our circle of friends because we don't have
total 90 friends.
But here's the bad news. Issue 2 has 63 downloads.
Hey, that's not bad. That's better than the first release of your issue 1.
But, I mean, they only came out 2 days apart. So I'm afraid what happened is people listened to the first one. They listened to the first few seconds of it and went, what in the world? And then, just left.
Or they're trying to savor the joy of the first one and are waiting to go on to the second one.
Right. Maybe they're disciplining themselves in advance.
Right.
So they want to space it out over multiple weeks.
That makes sense.
Boom.
So anyway, we brought David on to save this quickly dying podcast. So it's all up to him.
Perfect.
I'm skipping my other announcements just for the sake of you people who don't like long stuff. We'll have to do those some other time. Matt, do you have anything for the Treasurer's Report?
There is no update for the Treasurer's Report. We are continuing to drown in debt and desperately need donations.
Good.
Okay, correspondence. I will skip over a bunch of the Facebook things since those aren't really official anyway. I'll just say thanks. We did also, someone sent in a clip that I was going to have us play, but again, I'm worried about time, so we might have to save that for the future. I'm skipping over this email that I got. I'm skipping over this text. See, we just have too much good content here. Skipping over that. I got a phone call from somebody with some really helpful stuff. That's about 2 pages of my outline. Okay, we did get some voicemail messages. So, Matt, the first one is actually explicitly directed to you.
Oh, my.
Hi. I would like to direct this comment to Matt. Matt, because you were a willing participant in exposing my ignorance of computers, plus assorted titles your generation deems worthy of committing to memory, you are now fair game to have your youthful antics discussed for jocularity on holidays at my ample dining table. Kyle can explain the procedure. Oh, and by the way, Matt, what is your grandma's address? And does she have a fax machine? With love from Sugar Bear's grandma. Kyle can explain that also.
Wow. Well, I don't know who Sugar Bear is, but his grandma is certainly bringing the heat.
Yeah, no kidding. Holy cow.
Bringing the fire, as the kids would say.
That was awesome.
What did I do to offend such a noble woman?
Well, she said because you were a willing participant in exposing her ignorance of computers, plus her ignorance of assorted titles your generation deems worthy of committing to memory, by which she referred to the podcast titles at the beginning. Remember when I said, Grandma, these are the titles of podcasts?
I see. Yes. You know those? I feel like I was set up.
Well, she just says you were a willing participant.
It's true.
And then she says you're now fair game to have your youthful antics discussed for jocularity on holidays at my ample dining table. She said Kyle can explain the procedure.
Please explain the procedure.
I guess the procedure, so my grandma lives in a cabin in the woods.
Fair.
Awesome. So we have meals around her big dining table. And by the way, our names are all wood burned into the table.
That awesome.
Is sweet.
Everyone that she has over for a guest at the table writes their name on the table, and then she goes back and wood burns it in. So if you visit, Matt, you can have your name burned in.
Oh, that's got to happen.
And I guess the procedure that she's referring to is just that we will, as a family, will collectively mock you.
Wow, that sounds great.
Well, I have never had any doubt of that.
And then I guess she just throws another jab by asking about your grandma's address and whether she also has a fax machine, old school technology.
Right. I'm familiar with what a fax machine is, actually. She doesn't have a fax machine, actually. But she does have a corded phone. Well,
maybe they could communicate, and my grandma could dig up. Well, I don't mean my grandma. Whoever's grandma this was could dig up.
Sugar Bear's grandma.
Bear's grandma
could dig up some dirt on you.
Nah.
So anyway, I've realized that this podcast is going to tear my family apart because my mom sent me an email that I had to skip over just now because of all you people obsessed with length. Where my mom was
Tyler.
Where my mom was jealous about how much my grandma got mentioned.
Oh my gosh.
But then my grandma calls in and is mad about, what we said about her. So it's just rending my family asunder from all directions.
Right, and I'm the real victim since I didn't even say anything insulting about your grandma.
My grandma also sent me a text after listening to the second issue, and this text said, quote, "You two should be locked up. She says, not once did you mention chocolate." So I guess to add to our long agenda, we now are supposed to mention chocolate in every issue.
Very well. What's your favorite chocolate? David, you go first.
Hershey's. I don't know. I don't actually think
that's not a chocolate. You're canceled.
It's the first thing. It's the first thing
Goodbye,
that came to my
David.
mind.
Nope, you're done. Okay. Kyle, your favorite chocolate?
Probably the chocolate that appears on the top of fresh Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh my gosh.
Could have seen that coming.
Oh,
Matt,
man.
What's your favorite chocolate?
The 95% dark chocolate bars.
Look at this hipster over here.
They're great,
Yuck.
and anyone who denies it is a fool.
No, I agree, actually.
Well, call me.
Okay, well, thanks to that grandma who called in. We appreciate it.
Whoever you are.
Now, we did get another voicemail too, Matt. It's from somebody making what I think is a sarcastic dig at my MIDI keyboard playing.
The MIDI keyboard playing is really excellent, and I would like a further explanation for how that came to be.
Nice. Wow. Well, that person sounded really informed and handsome, as far as I could tell. Yeah, what is the answer to that? How did that come to be?
Well, I would love to answer this, Matt. I'm afraid it's going to take too long. I'll just say this. First of all, what a jerk to call and make fun of that. No, actually, I really thought that Matt was going to forget to call. I had that in my list of errors, Matt. I was going to nab you because in the last issue, I said, "You can call too, Matt." And he said, "I will." And I thought there's no way Matt's going to remember to do that.
And he did.
Boom.
So I hereby grant one kudo.
Wow.
Is it one kudo or one kudos? One kudo?
Now that's going to have to be in the errata.
Oh, great. To Matt. I think I might have misled people a little bit because when I said playing a MIDI computer keyboard, it made it sound like I have my fingers perched on the keys and I'm playing it like a piano, like real time, like dun 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 dun. It's really not that interesting. It's more
right. That would have been very impressive, to be honest. You would have had to have multiple fingers on multiple keys at the same time. That could be its own instrument.
I just imagined a mini piano keyboard.
Ah, okay. I mean, it was supposed to be a joke, computer keyboard, piano keyboard, keyboard.
Yeah, okay.
But no, the reality was more like I slowly press a key to select a note, and then it's the wrong note, so I have to delete it and go back, and then I slowly press another key, and then it's the wrong octave, so I go back and slowly correct it. And it just painstakingly, I plot all of these notes on a staff.
How long did this take?
It took way too long.
How long did this take approximately?
Well, we shouldn't get into that. Okay, so since I skipped all the other stuff, there ends our correspondence. And if
quick.
If you would like to call in for future issues, our number is 1-805-538-2382. That's 8055, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, now at last, Tyler is joining us for the main discussion, which is of talk radio and podcasts.
Woo!
Nice.
You can tell everyone's excited.
Well, I'm excited that Tyler is joining us now.
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
that's a big relief.
Well, our endeavors as a society are nothing if not systematic. It's right there in the name. And so we thought what would be, the systematic thing to do in starting a podcast would be to talk about what podcasts are.
Yep.
I'm not sure what the follow-up for that is.
I could hear Matt playing marbles in the background there.
I'm not playing marbles. That was someone else.
We all know you're playing marbles.
So I thought it would make sense to first talk about
marble sound.
We all know what it is, Matt. Your addiction to marbles has become a problem. I thought it would make sense to actually start with a little bit on talk radio, since that's sort of the genesis of podcast. Have either of you listened to much talk radio, either when you were younger or currently?
I like talk radio.
I have listened to various talk radios at different points in my life. How about you,
Nice.
Kyle? Have you listened to talk radio?
See, I try and let these guys talk instead of just dominating, and then it's just silence.
I mean, I can elaborate on my talk radio experience if you'd like. But I do know that we're not supposed to get into controversial topics.
Oh, well, Matt's are all going to be political, huh?
Yes. Well, that's almost what I associate talk radio with at this point.
Oh, interesting.
Well, how about David then? You said you like talk radio.
Oh, yeah. Well, I need clarification now that Matt made his comment. Would you count morning programs like, radio shows where the DJs talk together in the morning? Would that count as talk radio?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I've listened to a number of those in general over the years, and I've quite enjoyed them. I can't think of the specific names, but it's just, I don't know, fun to listen to friends talk and laugh in the morning. But I can say specifically the radio programs I've enjoyed listening to that are built around talking rather than singing or any other kind of music is the two NPR programs that come on over the weekends, the This American Life and the Moth Radio Hour.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those are usually pretty fun to listen to. The one, well, do you want me to go on? I can tell you a story of one.
Please.
It was pretty incredible. Oh,
wait, are you just going to steal a story from one of those shows? Is that what you mean?
What? That's ridiculous. I'm going to share a story they shared. Well, I mean, it's just, can I do that? Is that a copyright thing?
I mean, as long as you're not reading it off a script, I guess.
Not anymore. No.
I don't know. They might have ownership over your vague memory paraphrase of this.
I hope.
Speak to the legal team and excise it if necessary.
Excellent. Well, I mean, the long and the short of it is, it was a story of a woman whose husband had gone missing. And she contracted this guy, I guess, some kind of detective and team, and they went out to the mountains, and this was in the U.S., I believe. They went out to the mountains to find this guy. And as the story unfolds, either before or after, they learn that he went out to find some legit lost treasure. And, that's already kind of ridiculous. But it turns out, no joke, he actually did find the treasure. And as they were approaching this guy, they thought they were getting close. But the way they finally learned they were getting closer to him was because shots rang out and bullets whizzed past them. So this guy was hunkered down in this cave with his treasure, shooting at the people trying to come find him. And then it gets even better.
Wow.
Could it get better? It does. They actually get closer to the cave. They tell him they're coming to get him. And, well, this is actually kind of sad now that I think about it. Oh, well. I mean, the guy instead, I guess
it wasn't sad up till now.
Well, yeah, right. But I mean, the guy legit. Well, gosh, there we go. The guy actually went crazy, and he, instead of being taken by these people coming to find him, he just dynamited the whole mine with the treasure and himself inside.
But was there treasure?
So, yeah, no, I think that's what it was. He went and found it.
So then, who found it? They know where it is now.
He blew it all up, so I don't know if there's much left to it. And then the people that found him, they decided not to tell his wife what happened, which I thought was hard to understand if they were saying it now on the radio.
Yeah,
where she almost certainly could find it. But it was crazy, man. You can't make it. Well, you could make that stuff up, but it was highly unexpected.
Now, wait a second. Was this on This American Life or The Moth?
I think it was This American Life because the Moth Radio Hour is 10, 15-minute segments. This one was a 40-minute deal.
Wow.
Or radio. It might have been Radio Lab. I like that one too.
Wow, what an engaging guest who brings such engaging stories with him.
Yeah.
I could tell by your responses, you guys were just enamored by what I had to say.
That was brilliant. Brilliant content.
I'm wondering if he had lost his mind before he found the treasure or if the treasure corrupted his mind.
Well, I mean, that was part of the conversation about how it all went down and what even drew him out there and then left him there. I mean, that kind of thing is kind of crazy. That you would go out to the mountains by yourself, find some treasure, and then stay in that cave for so long that people come looking for you. And then when you're found, rather than be found and brought home to your family, you explode, you blow everything up.
This is what makes me think that maybe there wasn't treasure actually there. Maybe he was just crazy.
Gosh, maybe. But it seemed like he was not deemed crazy prior to his departure, but the being drawn into this hunt slowly had a very detrimental effect on him. It speaks to the fragility of the psyche.
Wow. This is getting near to topics too controversial for our podcast. But yes, I think it does.
I was also going to say I should add this so we don't have to put this in our errors and apology next time. I believe crazy is not the correct term. We should say
mentally
differently
infirm.
Treasured.
Well,
sure.
That reminds me of a comment I wrote.
Did you say differently treasured?
Maybe.
Sorry. Go ahead, David.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how controversial we're allowed to be, other than, I'll save it for later.
Just a cut right there. I don't know how allergic we're, or how controversial we're allowed to be, but I just wanted to say, oh, I'm sorry, we lost our guest.
Oh, well.
Perfect.
I'll be brief since I've talked way too much already. My main talk radio things were growing up. I did think of one as a kid, which was Adventures in Odyssey.
Oh,
that
classic.
was not only a talk radio, but that was like a drama radio thing.
I hated Adventures in Odyssey.
Wow. Well, I had a whole bit prepared about that, but I guess I'll have to skip that too.
When I was growing up, I didn't even realize
it was not true
fully that our radio played music.
Oh, wow.
Because we just listened to the news. Like, I knew at some intellectual level, but when I was able to drive, it really fully dawned on me that I could just play the radio, and the radio wasn't just the news.
Now, if you ever wanted a window into Matt's psyche and personality, that is it right there. He didn't know radios could play music.
That is wild.
His parents were just listening to political...
Radio. I knew that radios writ large, but ours seemed to not.
Wow.
That's awesome.
And then, like David, I started listening to NPR quite a bit. And then when I was actually living in the Twin Cities there, and when I was going to school with David and a few other people, I also started listening occasionally to a very interesting program. Are either of you familiar with Coast to Coast AM?
No. Sounds very boring.
Is it on very late at night?
It is.
Oh, I think that I might have stumbled upon this when I was living in Madison.
It is exactly the kind of thing you stumble upon. It's like 1 a.m. and you're flipping through the dials and you're like, you flip to something where they're talking about how aliens came down and,
nice.
Abducted George Soros and how
that's a fact. You can't make that.
Well, it is a show about basically paranormal things and conspiracy theories. It has been going on since, I'm looking it up now, since 1984.
Wow. Ooh, coincidence? 1984, the movie, 1984.
Oh my gosh.
Boy. Wait, the book.
Movie.
I know, I slipped. Edit that to say book. I read the book.
Gonna have to add that to the errata.
So I can't like endorse this, but if you've never listened, sometime you should tune in. You probably get it in your area. It's like, it really is coast to coast. It's all over the place. And it says here the program airs 7 nights a week from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. Eastern time.
On AM radio?
I guess it's probably on different. I don't know if it's always on the AM band or what, but and it's a wild ride. I mean, the people on there aren't joking; they're like mostly sincere, and it's mostly, a lot of it is callers, so people calling in and telling their ghost stories, that sort of thing.
This is really sad.
It's really fascinating. I mean, obviously there's some dangerous stuff with that stuff, but it's also, I like that there's a venue for people to share some things too that they think actually happened that sound differently treasured.
That'll have to be good callback.
I would also say, do you guys still, basically the only time you listen to the radio is if you're in a car?
Yes.
Actually, no. In an effort to minimize the amount of time I watch a screen, like on Netflix or Amazon Prime, sometimes I come home and turn on the radio and try to listen to it then. And when I wake up in the morning.
That's interesting, David. I guess I technically do have a radio. It's my alarm clock radio. I just never have it set to radio.
Dude, give it a try.
Okay. Is that sort of enough setup to get into podcasts?
Well, let me say one more thing about the radio. If you do,
we really don't have time.
If you do say, if you listen to the radio for your alarm, sometimes the music will make its way into your dreams, and it is very interesting.
Oh.
That is all.
Oh, that's very weird.
It is weird.
So you really got to be careful what station. What if you were listening to Coast to Coast AM?
That would be terrifying.
And you're waking up at 4:50.
Ugh.
Feel free to say more about talk radio if you think of it later, but we should now get into what is a podcast. Now, Matt, you're something of a biblical scholar, and David, you're something of a biblical scholar yourself. So you probably both remember the parable of the prodigal son.
Yes,
we always do.
And you might recall that in that the son goes off and squanders all his money, and he's poor, and he's living like in a pigsty or whatever. And it says that he longed to fill his belly with the pods the pigs were eating.
Yes.
So a pod is really food for pigs.
Oh boy.
It's slop. It's filth, really. So that's the first part of the word. And then you have cast. And cast, of course, means to throw or to disperse widely.
The Greek word would be ekbalo, to cast out.
Wow.
So a podcast is really a casting of filth widely.
Which really fits.
Yeah, it seems to.
Now, there is a competing etymological theory, which is that it actually came from the word iPod. David, would you like to explain for our younger listeners what an iPod was?
It's funny you should say that, because I have just now come into my mind the recollection of my uncle many years ago showing me his first iPod, and it was a large white box with a small screen and a circle in the middle, but the circle did not select things. It was like kind of an arrow deal, I think. And then, or you could choose the songs with the circle, but then above the circle were 4
David
buttons.
actually doesn't know what an iPod is.
No. Listen, no,
David's
seriously.
like, I heard a rumor once.
Quick. It's probably got a circle.
No, but seriously, the first iPod, the circle dial could just choose songs, but then there was still a play button and a stop button and like fast forward buttons. And then I had an iPod Nano once, and that was cool too.
Matt, did you ever have an iPod?
In fact, I did. I don't know if you all had this growing up, but I always basically expected to not get the new or cool thing.
Yeah.
In the realm of gifts.
Yeah.
And there were occasions where my parents did get me the new and cool thing, and it always caught me off guard. And the main examples I would say were when I got a PS2.
Wow.
And then when I got an iPod.
Your parents must have talked to my parents, because I had a strikingly similar experience.
Right. Were you always shocked?
Yeah, well, I got a PlayStation 2. I was like, wow.
Right. I think, there's a lot there, and we probably will have an entire episode about that kind of thing, about parenting or about video games or whatever.
Episode.
And I would love to hear what your favorite games were for that, David, or what your lousy games that your parents got for the inaugural unveiling of the PS2 were, because that was a different matter. But back to the iPod. Yeah, I got an iPod when they came out with like the iPod that could do video. So not like that was really that important, but I do remember not having very much music that I listened to. Before that, I sort of figured I didn't really like music. But
you didn't know you could hear it. It was all talk radio.
I know. But turns out I actually don't hate music. And so then I was always trying to get albums, because I knew my friends had like entire albums they listened to, and they had favorite albums. And I really only ever liked singles, basically. Like, I was very particular. I very rarely liked entire albums of things. But nevertheless, I would buy, entire albums just because it's like, well, you got to have the whole album.
Well, where did you buy your albums from?
From the iTunes store.
Yeah. Classic.
Yeah.
I'm sometimes surprised that's still around.
Well, and before that, I had mistakenly been conned into thinking that LimeWire was a legal and morally valid means of procuring music, and not an inconsiderable share of said albums came from LimeWire originally, although I think by now They've been entirely purged. So gone are all of my faux metal and like 2000s punk music from high school.
Did you guys ever hear about Bear Share? That was like the
Bear Share?
Oh yeah. It was kind of like LimeWire, but not.
But
no, I don't remember that one, but there were a lot of different illegal peer, what do you call those? Peer-to-peer
sharing. Yeah. Well, what's weird about that was I remember being very sensitized to like, copying CDs is wrong and like Napster is evil and like you need to pay for your music. But then I was like, when you're in whatever grade that is, talking to your friends and they're like, yeah, no, it is. But like if you copy your friend's CDs, like they let you copy it, so it's fine. And LimeWire is just doing that, but like using technology, you can just do it with a bigger network of people, so it's okay. And so I was like, oh yeah, that's great, that's brilliant. Now, of course, that was back when I believed in intellectual property.
Oh boy!
So that's going to veer towards topics that are maybe beyond the scope of this podcast. But anyway, huge error. But all to say, the iPod, revolutionary, and it made me listen to music and made me listen to a lot of music that I didn't like because I had all those albums. And really, I probably had more music I didn't like on my iPod than I did music I enjoyed.
Interesting.
Did you have any podcasts on that iPod?
I think I did have a few podcasts, none of which are adenine enough to mention by name. Wow. But I do believe I had a few podcasts, though not very many, I'll say.
David, did you listen to any podcasts on your iPod?
No. I listened to music. I didn't even know podcasts existed, honestly, until
until this one came out.
For like within the past probably 8 years, 5 to 8 years.
Oh wow! Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, seriously.
So we should say. See, I have all these other jokes and bits about iPods, but I'm like, I gotta skip it all. You people, just because of you Tyler type people who can't stay awake with me for more than 1 hour, I have to skip all this other stuff. So what a podcast! Thanks, Tyler, for being our token average person character. What podcasts really are is it's just audio on the internet that you can subscribe to. And the main thing is that because you can subscribe to this audio, you get the new ones. If you've subscribed, you get new episodes automatically when they come out.
Now, I actually have a brief story to interject here, surprisingly. Well, are we going to talk about RSS?
Oh boy.
In fact, that's the very next thing on my outline.
Oh, beautiful.
So go ahead.
Well, I just need to say that when I very briefly worked for Geico, an insurance company which will go unnamed, let's just call them Geico. After high school, I participated in a podcast of sorts and that was basically trying to be a Geico intern's CNN. And mostly it was just an occasion for me to mess with my very limited knowledge of how to use RSS markup stuff to send stuff to people. And it was extremely lame, but it was a blast when I was doing it.
So RSS, I'm sure everyone in this conversation knows, but RSS stands, believe it or not, for really simple syndication. And it's just a technology. If you did an image search for RSS, you would see the little icon for it. And probably everyone listening to this would recognize it. It's the little orange icon with the radiating waves, kind of looks like the Wi-Fi symbol or something. And when you see that on a website, so RSS is how blogs work too. If you want to subscribe to a blog, usually blogs have an RSS feed and you can subscribe in your feed reader, which have kind of not a lot of people use those as much anymore. But and all a podcast really is that, except instead of blog posts attached to the RSS feed, it's audio files.
I just learned about all of that right now for the first time.
Well.
That's the benefit of being a guest here.
That's right. Mind-blowing discoveries.
So I know some people have just been listening to this podcast by going to our website and playing it there. The benefits to actually using a podcast app, sometimes they're called podcatchers because they catch the new episodes when they come out, is that, first of all, you'll either get notified when a new issue comes out, or you can even have it set up to automatically download the new issue when it comes out. You get much better playback controls. Like on our website, it's pretty bad. You just have like play and pause and the volume. But on an actual podcast app, you'd have a whole bunch of controls, like Matt was talking about earlier, things like adjusting the speed. If we're just far too slow for you and you want to listen at 1.5 or 2 times speed, you can do that. That sounds crazy to people, but actually a lot of people listen to podcasts that way. Of course, you would destroy all of the comedic timing that we've worked so hard on, but
right.
Also, as I believe I mentioned earlier, a podcast app will remember where you were. So if you only made it through the first hour of this and then had to go listen to something else to fix your brain and then came back to this, it would remember where you had left off. And there's all other sorts of advantages to actually using an app. A podcast directory, I know this is super interesting for everybody. Remember, this is only a half fun issue. So podcast directories, well, they're directories that list all the podcasts out there that have been submitted to that directory. So when I mentioned us getting into Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, because I, applied to get in those directories and then they graciously accepted us. So different apps work with different directories. Like I don't use the Apple Podcast app for reasons that are about to become painfully clear, but my app taps into the
app tab.
Apple Podcast directory. Yes, the app tab. So I think that has maybe been enough to lay the groundwork for my rant. Are you both prepared for this rant?
I know I am.
I've been waiting with bated breath.
All right, I'm just going to take a sip here of Diet Coke.
Oh, boy.
Crack my knuckles.
Whoa.
Oh.
Wow. That was aggressive cracking.
Another benefit of podcasts are show notes. Now, we call them minutes here because ours are really top tier and they are actually minutes of our meetings. But I'm going to use the standard term show notes. Actually, show notes is a bad name. They should be called episode notes because there are different notes for every single episode. It's not just for the whole one thing for the whole show. And these are attached then to every episode. If you go to our website, they're just right there beneath the player. But even in your podcast app, when you're playing it, you can usually swipe up or down or to a side, and it will show you the notes attached to that episode of that podcast. Do either of you know why we have show notes?
No, tell us.
What they are used for?
I, of course, do know, but don't want to take your thunder.
Well, one thing is they contain links. So like even in this discussion, we've mentioned a few different things online. I will put links to all of those in the show notes. So you can just tap the links and it will take you to what we wanted you to see.
It is actually helpful. I have used that.
Another thing is that I think is useful is even non-link references. So if we just reference, like in the last issue, I talked about Thomas Moffat's The Silkworms. And in case you were like, what was that exactly? Typically, or sometimes those end up in the show notes. So you can see what the thing was that we referenced, even if it doesn't have a link to it. Another big thing, this is maybe one of the biggest things, are timestamps. So our minutes, our show notes, and the show notes for other good shows will have little time signature things. So it will say like 1 hour, 25 minutes, and 13 seconds. And in a decent podcast app, you can tap on those and it will jump exactly to that time. So that's, for example, how Tyler skipped all the boring stuff at the beginning, was he just said, oh, where does the main discussion start? And he saw the timestamp and he tapped it and it just jumped right there.
Smart work, Tyler.
Well done, Tyler.
People will also use show notes for production credits, like if they want to thank people who helped make it possible.
Like Tyler.
And then they might link to other things you want to access, like the podcast's website or how to get in touch with the podcast or the podcast's Patreon, how to give them your money.
That sounded like something you wanted.
So what would make for good show notes, do you think? Do you think short show notes that don't have much detail, do you think those are good? Or do you think lengthy, detailed, comprehensive show notes would be more useful?
Well, it depends. Are we talking about a casual, sloppy, thrown together podcast done by two schmucks and their periodic friend guests? Or are we talking about a dignified academic society's podcast?
Great question.
That is a good question. Well, I think silence. I think the answer is clear that what you really want are show notes that are long and descriptive enough that you can find what you're looking for.
That's right.
As someone who listens to a lot of podcasts, and we'll get into this in a second, I cannot tell you how much human life is wasted trying to find things that you remember were discussed in previous episodes of podcasts. And you go, oh, I know they talked about this somewhere on there and I want to find it again. And you go look at the show notes, and the show notes are, 4 bullet points, and you can't find it. So then what do? You get on the subreddit or the forum or the Facebook group or whatever it is devoted to that podcast. And those groups are almost always about 75% people posting asking, what episode was this talked about in? And then everybody sort of racks their brain, and hopefully someone listened to that one recently so they sort of remember. This is all such a massive waste of human life. All it would take is one person to write decent show notes that say that then they talked about this, then they talked about this, then they talked about this with timestamps, and then we would solve all of this. All of this would be solved.
Oh, go ahead.
Please don't disagree, Dave. No.
No, please continue your rant. I was riveted.
No, please,
okay.
Please.
No, okay. Well, I was going to say that in an interesting twist, the fact that the podcast does things inefficiently, it gives, because of that, it gives the opportunity for the podcast community to work together to rally around the cause of finding the information. But now it's all done for them, which may be better. I don't know anything about podcasts. Except what I prepared.
So in that sense, this comprehensive effort is really just a further decadence and atomization of society.
Could be.
Yeah, I guess it's a good point. We really should get rid of grocery stores too, because it really takes away from the communal farming that we all used to do to feed ourselves and our communities.
I'm glad to see it my way.
That's a great point.
No, actually, what David says ties in well with what's even better than show notes? Transcripts.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Actual transcripts of every single thing that was said. These are obviously rare. Not many podcasts do these because they're expensive to hire someone to do them. One of the podcasts I listen to, I'll mention in a moment, I used to listen to it a lot. It was called Security Now. And they hire someone to do full transcripts of every episode. And it is incredibly helpful because when you want to find something that was talked about there, you can just do a web search for, Security Now and then whatever thing you're looking for. And it will search all the transcripts and find exactly the part you want. Or sometimes they'll say something on there and I couldn't understand what it was. I can go check the transcript and read it. I've run across, and this is to David's point, there's a podcast I happened upon a year or so ago called The Change Log. And I don't listen to it. It's a technology podcast. But I noticed that they have collaboratively written transcripts. So the fans and listeners of the show work together on GitHub to transcribe everything that was said. And different people, you can just work on it. It's like Wikipedia, sort of in that sense. You can just contribute a little bit, or you could go through and do the whole thing. You could go through and look for typos that other people made. So I would like to know why our listeners aren't doing that for this program yet.
Maybe they have been working on it.
And they just haven't told us where it is.
Exactly.
That's a good point. So if you guys could please send in the link for that collaborative transcript project.
That would be great.
I was also thinking those transcripts could then be printed and bound into books. And those could make like great Christmas presents, for example.
Or a decent Christmas present.
Right.
And then we could submit them to libraries and get included in the catalog.
That'd be neat.
Right, as we used to be.
I would also say this, not only are good, descriptive, useful show notes, not only are they good for the listeners and for the host to go back and find things, but they're really good for attracting new listeners. Because how do new listeners find your podcast? Well, part of it is maybe someone's searching online and they're like, I want to find a podcast on why Scooby-Doo is terrible, for example. Well, if we described why Scooby-Doo is terrible in our show notes,
as if that were possible,
that will come up in their search results. Because obviously search engines don't know what's being said in this audio. Like Google isn't indexing audio.
Right.
But it is indexing web pages. So if you have good show notes, it will help with the all-important SEO, search engine optimization, which is something that everyone obsesses about. Everyone does everything they possibly can to increase their SEO, except for some reason, write decent show notes for podcasts. I'm ramping up into rant. Now, I did have a brief comment here that I'm going to skip, which was about chapters. There's this kind of newer technology where you can insert chapters into podcasts. So it's not just like timestamps that you tap, but it's more like how, there are chapters on DVDs.
Yes.
I don't know if our listeners remember what DVDs are, but I have some problems with that. The main one just being that those chapter marker things, I don't think can be very long. They can't be like full sentences. It just has to be like a little thing that says Kyle's rant or whatever.
Right.
So then the few podcasts I listen to that do the chapter thing, guess what they do because they can't put very long descriptions on those chapters?
What?
They also create show notes.
Oh.
So now you've got chapters that are sort of helpful and then show notes that are sort of helpful. And you have to bounce back and forth between the two.
That's regrettable.
So I'm not really in favor of the chapter thing, unless there's something I don't know about that, but it doesn't seem like the way to go.
Right.
So have I sold you on the incredible benefits of show notes and why they should be as long and as descriptive as humanly possible?
I just started an online campaign, so does that answer your question?
Good. I'll put the link to that in the show notes.
Perfect.
Also, there are people who complain about long show notes, just like people who complain about long episodes. And this makes even less sense because you don't have to read the show notes if you don't want to. I don't get why anyone ever complained, oh, they put a bunch of stuff there so I could find later what I wanted to find. And that really annoys me.
Is there some kind of standard information that's always put in show notes that people might be upset that you're burying?
I don't think so. I mean, if you look, most show notes are pretty bad. They're a few sentences, maybe.
Right.
Okay, so here's my impassioned rant. You two can play devil's advocate. You'll fail, but you're welcome to try. And also, you will be advocating for literal devils.
Okay, seems reasonable.
Okay. So I have toiled away for our listeners. I wrote the longest, most descriptive, most entertaining and enlightening and helpful show notes I've ever seen in my life. Because I had vowed in the past that if I ever made a podcast, I would fix this stupid show note problem and I would write actual useful show notes. I would take the little bit of time that it takes me to do it on the front end so that all human beings would benefit from it. I won't just pass the salt. I will develop a system to pass arbitrary condiments. Put in the time in the beginning, and then it will pay off for everyone. In fact, one person did text me and complimented me on the show notes so far, and it was a person who hadn't even listened to the audio.
Wow.
And this is what they said. Quote, I read the write-ups and chuckled. You're a funny writer. The show notes are so good, you don't even have to listen to us if you don't want to. And I said, thanks. You're literally the only person to comment on them so far. I'm fairly certain Matt hasn't even read them. So
interesting.
Our show notes are so good. They're basically like a second podcast.
Wow.
I add new things. Like there was a link to a YouTube video on life hacking. Remember when we talked about what life hacking had become and how you could make a shower head out of a Ziploc bag?
Ziploc, yep.
I found a YouTube video of life hacking video showing you how to make a shower head out of an empty soda bottle.
Oh my
Which is the closest thing I could find. So if you read our show notes, you'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll go home happy. There's extra stuff added there. If there is a podcast award for the best show notes, we should definitely get it. Last week when we talked about those Scooby-Doo clips, not only were they linked to in the show notes, but they were even cued on YouTube to the exact second when those different cameos and things happen. So you could just go right to what we were talking about.
Nice.
So I went all out on this, and in my podcast app, it all worked as we should. Then we started getting added to these other directories, and all heck broke loose.
Whoa, watch your language, Kyle.
Now, here's a time for a quote from my dad. This is what it made me think of. This is a life lesson my dad taught us growing up. He said, sons, he said, no good deed goes unpunished. I believe maybe that should be the tagline for this society. Because here I was doing this incredibly helpful, useful thing for the benefit of others. And this is what happened to me.
Oh, no.
So things were great for me with my podcast app. Everything was working as it should be. I was living in this paradise where the sun is always shining and the air smells like warm root beer. But I came down from my palatial abode to see how other people were living. And I discovered to my utter horror what putrid squalor all of you commoners are living in with your podcast apps.
Oh, no.
With Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And I stayed there. I stayed in that muck and mire to try to help you all. So, Apple. There's the Apple Podcasts website, not the app, but the website. Guess what? On the website, if you try to look at any podcast, not just ours, the show notes are cut off. They get cut off. It doesn't show the whole thing. But isn't that terrible, guys?
That's terrible.
Wow.
That's not even the worst. That's not even the worst thing.
What?
The worst thing is the links don't work.
Why is that?
if you had an actual link written out, like http:// it still wouldn't work as a clickable link, but at least people could, tell it was a link.
Right.
But of course, I didn't do that. I would just put like Scooby-Doo-video, and that would be a link that you could click. Well, when they don't format as links, it just says Scooby-Doo-video, and you're like, that wasn't a very useful sentence. And it's like, yeah, because that was a link to the video.
That's hilarious.
Not only that, the formatting is entirely gone, not just italics and bold and that sort of stuff. It doesn't even recognize paragraphs or line breaks. So it's just all one massive running together block of text. It's a disaster.
That's horrible.
So I looked into, why is this terrible thing happening? Well, guess what? Apparently there's a character limit for Apple Podcasts of 4,000 characters. Now the RSS people say, no, there's no limit. Because, of course, imagine if there were limits on blog posts. That's insane.
It would be.
So apparently this is just a limit that Apple imposed for who knows what reason those Cupertino nudniks have given us this limit.
Jeez.
But I asked Matt to test this because I don't have an iPhone, because I value freedom. And so I had Matt test it and send me some screenshots. And anyway, went back and forth. I also noticed some problems were happening with Google Podcasts. So I figured, okay, maybe it's this 4,000 character limit thing. I'll try staying under it. 4,000 characters might seem like a lot, but keep in mind, like spaces count as characters, for example. Plus, HTML characters count as characters. And the HTML stuff is the stuff that you don't see. That's like what makes a link work. That's like the code behind it. So all of that also counts towards the 4,000. Wow, they said. I can't believe that, they said. I know.
Wow.
Horrible.
Oh,
So,
my.
I found an article that did a study
About
that
time.
looked at 706,123 podcasts.
Now, wait
And
a
they
second. The article did a study?
Yes. Well, thank you, Matt.
Great.
The people who wrote the article did this study.
Good.
And that's a pretty large sample size. 706,000 podcasts.
It's not quite a million.
Do you want to guess what the average length of episode notes were in characters? Remember, the limit is 4,000. What do you think the average was?
500.
100.
The mean was 429.
Wow.
And the median was 256. And this study says, or rather the people who wrote the study say, the longest show description I found was 3,899 characters. So coming in just under the limit.
They obviously didn't find yours.
Now, guess how long ours were?
15,000.
Matt?
I don't even know. They're very long.
You sounded dejected when you said that. You should have been like, I don't know. They're very long and useful.
They're impressively long. They're beautifully long.
Well, let me tell you how long. Our first issue was 7,219, and the second issue was 9,643. And we haven't even gotten to complex issues yet. This has just been basic stuff that I've been writing in there. Also,
Obviously.
my text editor doesn't do a character count, so I had to just, this is like project building upon project, turning into this huge thing, right? So I found this thing that counts characters. I figured out how long, and also that the thing that I use that counts characters also gives you a reading level score. Like, what kind of reading level does a person need to be at to read this thing?
Right.
Like a fourth grade reading level or whatever.
But it wasn't fourth grade.
Do you want to guess what the reading level is for our minutes?
Graduate school.
College graduate.
What?
So I take that as a compliment.
You elitist.
So I toiled and toiled longer to cut ours down to this arbitrary 4,000 limit. And I was just weeping as I did so. I was cutting out all this good stuff. I was making these sentences almost couldn't understand them. I got to the point where I was even having to cut out timestamps. Like, well, people won't be able to skip ahead to this part. And I updated everything. It still wasn't working. Well, to make a long story short, I finally reached the following conclusions. The Apple Podcasts website is going to be terrible no matter what. Apparently, there's no way to satisfy it. It's just terribly broken. And I don't know why the Apple people don't fix it.
Well, now they will.
Matt and I also discovered, you've been called out, Apple.
Wow.
Matt and I also discovered that the Apple Podcasts app, which is, I believe, the most popular podcast app in the world, shows you different show notes depending on whether you are, and see, I don't know all the details of this yet because I don't have an iPhone, so I can't experiment myself, but it's either when you subscribe or when you download or when you actually play an episode. I'm not sure which of those three things you have to do, but it actually changes the show notes it's showing you. So it goes from like these cut off terrible things with no links or formatting to a proper thing.
About time.
Which is really stupid because part of how you decide whether you want to listen to an episode of a podcast is looking at the show notes to see what they talk about. And if it's not showing you the whole thing, or if it's showing it to in a form that you can't even understand, it's beyond me how stupid that is. The good thing is when you do subscribe or download or play or whatever you have to do, it does show you more than 4,000 characters. So Apple's own official documentation lies about this maximum character thing.
Wow. Deceivers.
So Apple Podcast app, even though it shows the whole thing, it still strips out a bunch of formatting. So it gets rid of the bold. It gets rid of BR line breaks. It gets rid of line breaks after bulleted lists. It gets rid of, now those things I could probably mostly live with, right? If you don't have bold, okay. But like it also gets rid of italics. Oh no, don't say it so.
Not italics. Our prized italics.
Italics are not only used for titles of things, like the silkworms, but it's also used for foreign words. So if we said, for example, a minute at the beginning say pro tempore, and you might be like, what is that? They misspelled it. No, if it's italicized, you go, oh, it must be in another lange.
Yep, that makes sense.
Because otherwise we might just say, oh, he doesn't know how to say English. He just said
something
pro tempore.
Right.
Instead.
Also, of course, we use italics for emphasis.
Yeah.
So it's literally changing the meaning of sentences because it's getting rid of emphasis.
That's preposterous.
Perhaps the most embarrassing thing for the Apple Podcast folks is that their app doesn't recognize timestamps. So you can't tap on a timestamp to jump ahead. So for the love of podcasters and love of yourself, please, listeners, do not use Apple Podcasts. It is a bad app.
But Kyle, what's an alternative for iPhone users?
Well, yes. I'll skip a bunch of my other stuff. I also had this rant on the podcast summary field and why that's dumb. Google Podcasts, I'll very quickly say, I still have no idea what's going wrong with there. So Tyler, yes, we are on Google Podcasts, but it is in some ways more of a mess. I was troubleshooting this with my brother last night or 2 nights ago. And even though we both have Android phones and we both installed this Google Podcast app, it shows up differently on our two things. So sometimes those get cut off. Sometimes the links don't show. Sometimes bullet lists don't work. So it just all gets munched together. I can't find any help about this online. Also, the Google Podcast app doesn't do timestamps. Timestamps don't work. Wow, I can't believe that. That's what terrible they said.
Honestly.
Oh, man.
So for the love of podcasters and love of yourself, please stop using Google Podcasts. It's shameful that these companies like Google and Apple, who have all the money, can't make these basic things work when even little community-driven podcast apps make all this work just fine.
Disgusting.
The last thing, and I'll be quick about this, is Spotify. They make Apple and Google look like angels.
Let them have it, Kyle. Give it to them.
I really thought this was going to get better when we got to Spotify.
No, they are the worst with show notes by far. Links don't work, all the bad stuff, basically. Spotify wasn't built for playing podcasts. It was built for playing music. So it just lacks like basic functionality that you would want in a podcast app. But here's the worst thing, gentlemen, and the part I really want you to get fired up about.
I'm already fired
up. Spotify is trying to take over the podcasting world.
What? Horrendous.
There is a very useful video from Verge, which I will link in the show notes.
Nice, got him.
You people using these bad apps, your show notes have probably already cut off by now, and you won't see this. But there's a link to this video, and they explain this is what happened. So last year or so, Spotify bought Gimlet Media, which was a podcast network. So think like a TV network. They had a bunch of different podcasts into them. They bought them for $195 million.
Nice.
Then they bought Parcast, which is another podcast network, for $55 million. Then they bought Anchor, which is a service for making podcasts, for $154 million. Then they bought The Ringer, which is sports and pop culture podcast network, for $196 million. So basically, they're just throwing something like $500 million around to try to acquire all of these networks and apps for making podcasts.
Maybe it's all just a desperate attempt to get the technology to actually have a good app.
Oh no, I'm afraid not, because here's the real dinger. Are either of you familiar with the Joe Rogan podcast?
Yes.
I have heard of it.
I've seen it on YouTube.
Joe Rogan is the most popular podcast in the world.
For now.
And yes, thank you. And until your transcripts come out. Spotify just bought didn't buy, but they signed a deal with Joe Rogan that said, hey, your podcast, you know how, this is what Spotify said, I'm sure. They said, you know how podcasts are great because they're free and open? How you can use just any app you want to listen to them, and how they're just RSS feeds, and how it's just, it's not controlled by one corporation. It's a thing made by the people for the people. You know how you know how everyone loves that about podcasts?
Yeah.
Well, what, Mr. Rogan, if we were to pay you $100 million to agree that you will only be on Spotify with your podcast?
Honestly, I'm surprised he would do that, given like
how
the
rich
way he
is
talks.
Joe Rogan? Also, is he an actor or
he's like comedian / UFC guy / he does whatever he wants because he's been successful at it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And he was the host of Fear Factor.
Right.
And,
he was?
Yeah.
And I mean, this podcast makes him a ton of money too.
Yeah.
What seems pretty clear is that Spotify is probably going to try and do this with a bunch of podcasts to make it Spotify exclusives, so that you have to use the Spotify service, and they're just creating this impenetrable walled garden.
Oh,
so
no.
We're basically going from radio, which was like the freest thing in the world. It's literally traveling through the air, and anyone anywhere can pick it up. You just need a device with an antenna, and it's totally private. No one even knows if you're listening to a thing, right, on your own radio. They don't know who you are. They're not collecting personal data on you to sell you mattresses or whatever. And we're going from that to just the opposite, to a thing where this company knows who you are. They know all your browsing history and everything, and now they're tying it into this. And
wait, how do they know your browsing history?
Well, because
that's how they sell you mattresses.
Exactly. There's we're running out of time here, so I'll have to skip over some of the most damning details of this. But there are some you can find all sorts of articles about this and about the evil things that Spotify is already doing. In fact, well, I have it linked to here. I'll put in the show notes.
Nice.
A page written by Richard Stallman, which is someone who I'm sure we'll talk about in the future again, where he says, this article shows the twisted ways that Spotify presents snooping as a way to serve users better. Never mind whether they want that. Spotify can tell whether users are happy or sad based on what they listen to. It will use that data to manipulate them. The data will sooner or later be combined with other personal data to control people according to the corporate will. Now, that might be a little bit strong language there, but the point is, for one problem, just one, Spotify is a totally closed source app. There's no way to know what that app is doing on your device. It's just a mysterious black box.
This sounds
and you can't.
This sounds eerily similar to an episode on Parks and Rec.
Good.
Yeah.
Should I link to that in the show notes?
Well, it's all.
Yes.
Yeah. You know what I'm talking about? Those Parks and Rec episodes with their. It was like the Parks and Rec version of Facebook. They came into the town and stole and were data mining everything.
Oh yeah.
Right, yeah.
It's
when
like
they go into the future.
Yeah. But it was even before that, and they were sending personalized gifts to people. And Ron Swanson got a personalized gift and shot it out of the sky. It was awesome. Oh, his son did.
There's also the
go ahead.
There's also the thought that probably why Spotify is doing this is because when you listen to music on Spotify has to pay royalties to the artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you listen to podcasts on there, they're not going to pay royalties to the podcasters.
Well, unless they did.
They won't, because people like us, we basically have to be in their directory if we want people to listen to us.
Oh boy.
And in fact, not only are they not going to do that, the theory is Spotify is probably going to start inserting ads into people's podcasts so Spotify can make money off of other people's podcasts.
By selling mattresses?
Right. Mattresses and food delivery programs and Squarespace and
Great.
So anyway, I had a whole bunch of other stuff in this rant that I'll skip about that. Again, the Verge video goes into this. The Verge video says, for example, there's never been in the history of this whole thing, there's never been a single podcast company that sells ads, makes content, has a popular podcast player, and gives people the tools to create their own shows. Spotify now has all of that. And the Verge, I can't remember if it's a Verge video or I also linked to this, an episode I just listened to of a podcast called the Accidental Tech Podcast, episode 379, they also talk about how bad this will probably be for the whole podcasting world, how it's going to mess up advertising. It's going to lock down a system that was previously opened. They compare it to what YouTube has done for video. And I mean, if you look up anything from people who are like YouTubers, basically none of them like YouTube. They all complain about how they really don't like their entire livelihood being tied to this one company and its decisions. And YouTube often makes really dumb decisions that sort of break the system or force people to make certain kind of video for the channel to even be feasible. So in the dystopian future, I will say I tried to warn you all when this goes bad. I also had a bit in my rant here that I'll skip over about how the world works and how nerds and idealists and good people build good things to benefit all of humanity, and then greedy business people come in and try and think about how we can lock it down and make a bunch of money off of it and wreck the thing. I would also point to the World Wide Web. And part of what makes the web so great is that it's open and it's not controlled by any one company. And companies have tried to sort of take over in the past, like Microsoft in the early days. They talk about this on the ATP episode too. So I hope podcasts remain open. But in order for this to work, our listeners have to boycott these things. So I am calling on our 43 listeners to really think about, whether they want to destroy the whole podcast landscape or not. I was talking to my parents and they said, are they going to pull your show off of Spotify and Apple and Google if you talk about this stuff? And I said, first of all, it's not a show, please. And then I said, I hope they won't obviously pull us, but I said, I wish they would, because that would actually make headlines.
Yeah, that would be, we would use all of our vast network of connections to rain fiery brimstone upon them.
Oh yeah.
And if you need any more reason to think that Apple or Google or Spotify are just bad, evil companies in general, I have also included a few articles, like a recent one about Apple removing podcast apps from China, the China store, after censorship demands from the Chinese government.
Sado.
And a few other great things about that, or about Apple and how they use, just all the terrible stuff. But also, if I can't persuade you based on principles of what's good for everybody, I think I can at least appeal to everyone's base animal instincts and just say those apps are not as good as actual, real podcast apps. So here's my conclusion with my call to action. Are you guys ready to be called?
Oh, I'm already been called.
That's awesome. Friends.
Yes.
Romans. Countrymen. Lend me your ears.
Lent.
I come to bury Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and their ilk, not to praise them. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones. So let it be with these abominable apps. I see a whole army of my countrymen here in defiance of tyranny. You have come to fight as free men, and free men you are. What will you do without freedom? Will you fight?
Fight? Against that? No, we will run and we will live.
I fight and you may die. Run and you'll live, at least a while. And dying in your beds not so many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell these tyrannical apps that they may take our conveniences, but they will never take our freedom! Did I sway you guys?
Yeah, that was good.
Now, it is possible that I got some of this wrong. Maybe there's some little details I don't know. But if modern global politics and warfare have taught me anything, it's that you attack first, and then you look into whether the attack was truly justified. You got to strike while you're still good and mad.
Fair enough.
So let me just briefly say then what you should use instead. If you're on an Android-based device, I highly recommend an app called Antenna Pod. It doesn't cost anything. It's free and open source. It does everything I could possibly want it to do. And it renders show notes beautifully. If you're on a laptop or desktop, running basically anything, I recommend Gpodder. See, you probably couldn't understand what I said there, but it will be spelled out in the show notes. I can't give the same full-fledged recommendation there because I rarely ever use it. There might be better ones there. If you're on iOS, like Matt, may God help you.
And may he.
I actually did try to find any sort of open source podcast app for iOS, and I couldn't. So I can't give these my unmitigated recommendation, but the one that I know, like everyone who knows what to look for uses, is called Overcast. It's not open source, but like the guy who wrote it is a guy named Marco Arment. In fact, he's one of the co-hosts of that ATP podcast I cited. And he's seems like a decent guy who's probably not doing evil things. And the app just works really well. So that's what I would recommend with an asterisk for iOS. I have created a new page on our website that describes all this stuff and like which apps you can use and how to use it, since I realize we have some people listening who aren't familiar with podcasts in the past. And also I had another little miniature rant that I will just have to pass over for now, but it was basically about, and Matt, this is really a great argument for what we're trying to do here, which is why am I having to figure out all this stuff on my own? Why is there not like a source that says, hey, here's how all the different podcast apps render show notes and which things they show and which things they don't show? Why is it just up to everybody individually to figure that out and reinvent the wheel over and over?
Mm-hmm.
I did find one article with a spreadsheet where they actually had done this. They went and tested a whole bunch of different things and presented it, which was very useful. And it's what I'm mostly working off of. I'll also put that in the show notes. But it hasn't been updated in a while. And as far as I can tell, only they can update it. So I don't know if it ever will be updated again. And it just seems like the kind of thing that, again, how much human life is being wasted on this? And just people like me who create podcasts having to figure all this out on their own. Shouldn't there just be a source that tells you how to do all this?
It seems there should.
Or all these podcast directories, even better, should just agree to a standard. Like, here's what we are going to render in show notes, and here's what we're not going to render. It's insanity. I'm skipping through a bunch of this other rant here. We're now probably getting close to running over 2 hours, but just briefly, would either of you want to throw out any like podcasts that you do listen to or that you enjoy or want to point people toward?
This is the only podcast that I currently listen to.
Oh, good.
This is the only podcast I enjoy.
Oh, man. Well, I have a whole list of them. See, neither of you listen to podcasts that much then.
Not too much.
Not
I mean,
now.
I YouTube stuff sometimes. Yeah, not anymore. Now that I know about the evils.
Right.
Wow.
But seriously, I mean, I will say I was kind of on the fence with the rant, surprisingly. But then towards the end, when you conveyed the actual, like, pretty mucked up stuff companies were doing, I came on board.
I mean, it's not the worst thing of all the evil things that I will rant about on this, but it's a nice starter. It's a nice starter thing to get people working on.
I agree.
Because if they couldn't suffer through that, they might not enjoy future things we're going to rant about. So unlike you guys, I guess I listen to a ton of podcasts. I just have my earbuds basically in all day. And I basically just listen whenever I'm doing some other thing where I can't be doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm doing the dishes, doing laundry, cleaning my room, making food, going for a walk, whatever, I listen. So I probably listen to between 1 and 2 hours of podcasts a day. So I have a whole bunch of recommendations on different things. I can put some of these in the show notes too. I would just say this. There are so many podcasts out there now that you can basically search for whatever it is that you're into. And I know you're going to think, well, no one else is into, crocheting miniature Greek gods underwater, but probably there is a podcast about that.
I really hope that you've actually discovered and will put it in the show notes.
If you could do that one, that would be great. So I'm skipping down through all my recommendations here, skipping through my little miniature history of podcasts that I prepared. Basically, it's just, it's kind of funny how these podcasts have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
It's just people didn't really, like David was saying earlier, it's just people didn't really know about them, largely until the podcast Serial hit in 2014. Right. And that's really when it started to take off.
It used to be called audio blogging.
Did it really?
Yeah. That's what I found on the Wikipedia.
We maybe should also say that both of you are actually veteran podcast creators, unlike me. This is my first time, but...
Yeah, that just shows... that explains the effort differential between us.
We also had a segment here on audiobooks, which, Matt, you and I talked about before in one of our Lost issues.
What a stimulating and intriguing discussion that was, now lost to the sands of time.
Yeah, so now this just means we're going to have another meeting that's just about audiobooks.
I like them.
And especially because I know David had some thoughts about this. Maybe if you're okay with this, guys, if we sort of close with, do you have any, so we've maybe sung some of the praises of podcasts, and I mean, I think they're great. I listen to stuff all the time, and it's great to be able to listen to things while you're doing other things anyway. But do you see any bad things about this new cultural obsession with podcasts? Any worries at all that our listeners should be aware of?
I know that sometimes I can get distracted by the, I basically use YouTube in a similar way, just listening to the audio. And I know that it can decrease my efficiency, but it is a great way of learning a bunch of interesting information. So it's kind of, that's good.
Yeah. I mean, the praise that I would offer is what Kyle already mentioned, namely that it gives you the satisfaction of being able to multitask. Like in one of the rare instances where you're actually multitasking, like you are listening and doing something else. But the downside of podcasting, could be the potential unintended consequence of podcasts and the avid consumption of them is that you end up substituting actual interaction with human beings, which we all need to some extent, with virtual interaction with people online that you aren't actually interacting with at all, but they just fulfill that need to have some sense of connection. And honestly, given the tendency that we have increasingly as a result of our deep engagement in social media with withdrawing from actual human interactions, podcasts and their massive popularity could be contributing to that. In fact, as I was doing some research on podcasts and socializing and like what the consequences were, I found podcasts on socializing. So I thought, I was like, that there's some sad irony to that. That like, here, isolate yourself from other people for a moment and listen to us tell you how to be around people.
Right.
And so you could do it well, and like, and people do that. I read a book, which I would recommend, on the unintended consequence of social media stuff, which in this case could be related to the podcasting, and it's called Reclaiming Conversation by Sherry Turkle. It's good. And I mean, you can see it happening at a rapid pace in the forthcoming generations, that people are losing their capacity for actual like good social interactions. And I mean, I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but it's the sort of thing that can kind of just happen, and if no one says anything about it, it will just continue to happen, and it will become the norm, and no one will know what we missed. We'll just know that something doesn't feel right, except for those of us that have paid attention. Wow, that sounded super like apocalyptic.
No, very fitting.
Yes. But yeah, so I don't know. I could talk a lot about that. But those are my initial concerns.
Yeah, have you guys seen the image? Youth would call it a meme, but it's a picture of a kid sitting next to a poster, and on the poster there's like three girls or kids sitting and chatting and like eating ice cream and laughing together, and then this kid is sitting next to the poster on the floor. I think he's also eating ice cream, and he's also laughing, and he's pretending like he's sitting with that group of kids on the poster. And the caption is, "What I feel like listening to podcasts."
Right.
And, it's like, yeah, that is a little worrisome, isn't it? I mean, especially with already our millennial generation has some of these challenges, probably largely because of technology, but other social factors too, of like already being disconnected from real people and real relationships. And then you have these voices that are just talking in your ears. And they're
I was going to say, you made a comment earlier that I wrote down when I was silently listening before I surprisingly arrived on the meeting. And you made a comment about people like respond. Like I think I texted you in real time in response to the podcast. I was going to say that like, a podcast has arrived when people audibly respond to what they hear in the podcast.
Right.
Like, yeah, I get it. I totally agree. Even though they cannot be heard and they are not being received in any way.
Right.
Well, I mean, it says something about how we are, connecting on a maybe an emotional level or a relational level, if the two are different, with what we're hearing. Like we respond as if we're having a conversation, which at least implies that it's filling the need we have for socializing in a way that actual socializing probably should.
So I think maybe our real moral is people should unsubscribe from everything except this podcast, because you really shouldn't listen to too much.
Yeah.
Although
just in perfect moderation.
Yes, I would say one actual call to action would be to prompt people or to encourage people to find friends to discuss the things about which they learn from podcasts.
What do you mean actual call to action?
Whoa, no, I mean like...
Whoa. Talk about errata.
In contrast with telling people to not listen to any other podcast. I mean, obviously they shouldn't, but in addition to that...
I also had a whole thing here that I won't go into, and David, I think, actually probably both of you would agree that I think podcasts for some people, like myself, are filling the time that otherwise would have just been spent in quiet self-reflection.
Yep.
And instead it's like, I don't really want to deal with all those, devil dogs that
internal
come in my mind.
Life.
Right.
So I just want to be intaking media at all times.
Yeah.
And obviously this isn't unique to podcasts. That's also a criticism that's made about Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and all these things where we just, like, do you guys have this experience of when you forget? For me, it's forgetting my headphones, or forgetting your phone or something when you're somewhere. And then you're just so angry because you're like, now I have nothing to do for the next 3 minutes. It's like, as though you just need to cram every single moment with media intake.
Well, I find that when I go on social media stuff, the stuff that freaks me out is when I feel like time has passed at a rapid pace and I've sort of isolated myself from the world and just mindlessly scrolled on, in my case, Facebook. And then I come back to like reality. It's very disturbing how easily that happens.
Matt wouldn't know anything about that.
Not at all.
I'm sorry, David, that you didn't get to talk more, and that people are probably like, why did you have on a guest when you were just going to rant the whole time? So we should definitely have you back.
Of course.
I'd be happy to come back.
Now, I don't think you're going to want to come back for the next one, probably. And Matt, we haven't talked about this yet, but for the next issue, since we're doing an actual boring one, I think maybe we should talk about how to find the best X.
Wow, that's a big topic.
The sort of the setup of like, what are the existing things that aren't really good enough yet, which is why we're having to do this. But like, for example, Consumer Reports is a pretty helpful way to find the best product. Or like the Wirecutter, which I'll be happy to talk about, is for me probably the best product review.
Well, let's not give it all away.
Right. So I just wanted to say enough so that if people out there listening have any thoughts or any things you do to find the best X, whether it's a product, and those are a little bit easier, but especially the best like methods, like what's the best way to do a thing? Are there any sort of go-to sources that you have? We would love if you would call in and let us know.
Right.
The phone number is 1-805-538-2382. That's 805-5, et cetera, et cetera. At this point is also when we thank our patrons, but we don't have any. So,
yet.
Yeah, not yet.
Matt, or especially David, do you... No offense, Matt. Do either of you have any parting words or jokes you prepared that I cut you off?
Well, Carl, as you know, I am terrible at actually preparing jokes. I can only be funny given certain circumstances, so I have no hilarious closing anecdotes or jokes. Thanks for the opportunity, the life-changing experience that it was to be on this program. Can I say program, not podcast?
Yes, you may.
We'll permit program, and podcast is technically correct.
Yeah, I guess we'll just look to see whether our download numbers go up or down, David. I'm sure it will have nothing to do with us doubling the length of this, and it will all just be about the fact that we had David on.
Oh, yeah, we can just call it the David score.
Right.
Only if it's
see
good.
How it goes.
I want no credit.
Well, I'm sure we would love to have you back.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
It's true.
Should we move to adjourn?
Let's move to adjourn.
Okay,
wait.
I move to adjourn.
As a guest, can I vote or do I not?
No.
Unfortunately, no.
Roger that. I'm hurt, but I understand.
Very good. Now return to your silence.
First of all, I move to thank our guest, David. Is there a second?
There is a second.
Oh, good.
Is there any discussion on this matter? I would just like to say it was very nice of our first loyal fan to also be our first loyal guest.
An incredible opportunity, never to be forgotten.
All in favor of officially thanking David, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say no. The motion carries. David, you are officially thanked by the Society.
That was a nail biter.
Wow, that was incredible.
And I will now move to adjourn.
Seconded.
All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. opposed, say no. Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, David, and thank you for anyone who stuck with us this long. And if you really hated this idea of like 2 hours, but it only comes out every other week, I guess let us know that too. Although
and you can take it up with Tyler.
Right. All right. Thanks for being here, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Memento mori.